Hey preteens, how's it going? This week we are continuing to look into our ZOOPLOSION series and having a more in-depth look at the topic of the day. Today we're going to be talking about what's called the fall of man, basically how sin entered into the world. And as we read the story, we can see a little bit more and understand a little bit more about why our world is the way that it is, why we have violence and death and lies and deceit and all of these things that God didn't intend for us from the beginning. You see, God created the Garden of Eden, where the first man Adam and the first woman Eve, they lived. And when they lived there, they had an incredible relationship with God. And it was good. God knew that it was good. That's how God made it. That's how God wanted it to be. But we're going to see what happens to take it from there to where we are today. Because something happened between the garden and where we are now that all of this crazy stuff that we have in our world today, in a fallen world, that's why it is the way it is. So let's go ahead and read out of Genesis chapter 3, and we'll go ahead and talk about it a little bit more after we're done. So Genesis chapter 3 is starting with verse 1. It says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?' The woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it or you will die.' 'You surely will not die,' the serpent said to the woman, 'for God knows that when you eat, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to man, 'Where are you?' He answered, 'I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid.' And he said, 'Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you to not eat from?' The man said, 'The woman that you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it.' Then the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is it that you've done?' The woman said, 'The serpent deceived me, and I ate it.' So the Lord God said to the serpent, 'Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all the wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel.' To the woman he said, 'I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. With pain that you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you.' And to Adam he said, 'Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat of. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return.'" So there is a ton going on here, a lot of things to unpack. So I'm going to try to do that as quickly as I can, but I want you to understand some of the dynamics that are happening here. One is that Adam and Eve were together and they had a relationship with God. And God gave them ground rules. He said, here is what you can do and here is what you can't do. God was very specific about what he wanted them not to do. And they understood it. It wasn't like they didn't have a grasp or an understanding about what God asked them not to do. They knew extremely very well what God expected of them. So when the serpent comes to Eve and Satan, which means adversary, tells her to eat from the tree, convinces her, talks to her, twists some words around to make it seem really enticing to eat from this tree, she does. She gives in to temptation. She disobeys God. She sins. Sin is anything that we do that is outside God's will, anything that goes directly against what God tells us to do. And that's exactly what she does. When she does, she also gives it to Adam. Adam has seen all of this. He knows what's going on. He's not being duped. He takes it and he eats it. And so both of them have sinned. And they both have disobeyed what God wanted from them from the start. When they did that, it changed everything. It brought things into the world that God didn't really want to have happen. But they did. And when they do this, when they sin, we can see that there are different things that happen. One of the things that we see that happens is the blame game starts. God says, "What happened?" And Adam says, "Well, it's Eve's fault because she gave the fruit to me. It's her fault." And then God takes his attention and gives it to Eve and says, "What happened?" And Eve says, "Well, it's not my fault. It's the serpent's fault because he tricked me into eating it." But the thing is that both of them had a grasp and an understanding of exactly what was happening, exactly what was going on. There was no trickery beyond what they could have controlled. They could have been tempted and not sinned. Eve could have been tempted by the snake, by the serpent, by Satan, and said, "No, I won't do it." But she did. Being tempted in and of itself is not sin, but disobeying, crossing that line, it is. And when that happened, it brought a lot of curses upon Adam and Eve and the descendants of them, which you and I are, and also the ground itself, to the serpent. And we can see what those curses are. We see that the serpent is to lay on its belly all of the days of its life and eat dust. We see that snakes do that to this very day. We see that women have to have pain in childbirth. That's a punishment. That's a consequence. And that's what I want to talk to you really quickly about, is that each sin, all sin, has a consequence. First, there's a consequence between us and God. Sin separates us from God. God can't be around sin. And when we sin, that separates us. And that's a bad thing. That's really ultimately the worst thing, right? But beyond that, there are consequences on earth. God puts consequences for both. He gives them an understanding of what is good, what is evil. Because they ate from the fruit, they can see that separation has happened between them and God. But then beyond that, God says there are consequences that you have to be able to see right now. And that is given to Eve. And then also to Adam. To Adam, he says, you're going to have to work for your food. You're not going to have it just given and delivered to you. You're not going to just pluck it from trees anytime you want it anymore. You are going to have to work and toil and sweat and get it. And the ground's not always going to be forthcoming with your crops. Farmers have it rough, and it's because of Adam. And so all of these things are put together to see and to show us how our world got from being this perfect good thing that God made to a broken and fallen and hurting place that we live in today. But there's hope. Because in the garden, Eve and the serpent had this encounter. And from that encounter, God put forth his plan, which was Jesus. It says in the scriptures that the serpent would strike his heel, meaning an offspring of Eve, but that this offspring would crush the head of the serpent. That's Jesus. Satan struck a blow to Jesus by having Jesus die on the cross. Jesus died on the cross on his own accord, on his own will. But he let that happen to him. He got struck, but he didn't stay dead. Jesus rose from the dead, conquering Satan and sin and death. And we can see that all the way back in Genesis, God had a plan. So as broken as things are now, God has a solution. And it's been there from the very beginning. And that's through his Son, Jesus Christ. And there's nothing that you and I can do that can be better than what God has already provided in that of his Son, Jesus Christ. Because you and I, we can't get rid of that sin. We can't get rid of that brokenness. We can't repair that relationship with God on our own. It's only through what Christ has done for you and me can we do that. So this week, what I want you to do is I want you to think about a couple different things. I want you to think about, where is your relationship with God? Are you putting your faith and trust and hope in yourself, trying to make things right with God? Or are you putting your faith and trust and hope in Jesus Christ? And are you living that kind of life accordingly? And there are other questions that I have in your packet that I want you to take a look at this week. Look at it with your parents, discuss it, talk about it. These are things that are really important to know now so that you can understand the world that's around you. Well, that's all we have for ZOOPLOSION this week. I'll talk to you guys next time.